you bargain, that the price that you come up is the result of some sort of silent bargaining process between two people that you can't really even observe.
In this week's episode of the Mixtape podcast, I had the opportunity to interview Katy Grady. Katy is a PhD economist at Brandeis University, where she is both a professor in the economics department as well as the dean of its international business school. Katy did her PhD in economics at Princeton University in the early 1990s, which, as some of you may have figured out by now, is a place and time of special interest to me because of that department's central role in helping birth an approach to causal inference that ultimately became extremely influential. In this interview, we discuss her love of theory like bargaining models and price discrimination, as well as studying unusual markets like huge open-air fish markets and art itself. We talked about how she uses theory and data to understand these markets as well as its workers, as well as just the joy of collecting data yourself and applying economics to new things. I hope you really enjoy listening to and learning about Katy and her life as much as I did. She's a very cool person with an approach to learning that I think many of us can still relate to. My name is Scott Cunningham, and this is Mixtape, the podcast. Okay, this is really neat to get to talk to Katy Grady. I am a longtime fan, first time to ever meet you. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here.
Before we get started, can you tell us, for those that are listening and watching, where you work right now and what your occupation title is?
Yes. So I am the dean of Brandeis International Business School, and I'm also the Fred and Rita Richmond Distinguished Professor of Economics. Brandeis is located right outside Boston.
Great. Okay. Before we get into your career and your life, can you tell me where you grew up and what were you like as a kid?
Oh gosh, yes. I grew up in Florida. I was born and raised in Florida, and I, was both very sporty. So I played tennis, and I played tennis in college. And I also read a lot, and I really liked math.
And so then you liked math and you liked reading. So that's really interesting because your career, I want to talk about your career in creativity and art. What kind of interest in art and creativity do you have kind of as a young person?
Well, I played the piano, so I took piano lessons. So in music, did not do a lot on art as a young person. I got interested in art through my interest in price discrimination. And meeting some artists who we were concerned about the way that their works were being priced. So that's how my interest in art started.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. Well, shoot. Those are my questions at the end of the interview thing, but I want to talk about them now, but I got to go in order. So tell me how you ended up at Princeton. When did you get there and when did you graduate?
Okay, so I'll tell you, I did my undergraduate at Tulane in math and Russian, so I double majored, and then went straight to Columbia Business School and did a finance and marketing concentration, and then worked for Cargill for 2 years, both as a bond trader and as a corn gluten meal trader. It's a chicken feed, basically, is what it is.
Wow.
And we'd hedge with soybean meal futures. So I worked for 2 years, but I knew right after starting at Cargill that I wanted to go back to do a PhD. And so when I was working at Cargill, I applied to a few schools to go back to do a PhD, and I chose to go to Princeton. So that's how I got.
How could you tell that what was sort of the burning thing inside you that made you wanted to get a PhD in economics?
Well, first of all, I felt I was good at math and good at writing or reading, but wasn't stellar at either. Like I wasn't going to be, I wasn't going to become a theoretical mathematician, nor were my skills enough to become a historian on the other side. So I thought economics was sort of middle of the ground.
Right.
I also knew from trading that it's in my nature to think about things. So split second trading decisions, it was fine. But I did best when I had some time to think about things. And I missed academia. I just missed academia.
You liked it. You liked being a student and just being around thinking and stuff.
Exactly. And those were some of the best 4 years of my life. I really enjoyed doing it.
Oh, you did it in 4 years?
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely enjoyed it though.
Oh yeah. What'd you love about it so much?
The people that I was around, I mean, my friends you're around, everybody you're around is smart and really trying to do something. And just there was a lot of energy. I started out doing bargaining theory, and again, I liked coming up with ideas that nobody had thought of, and then trying, maybe they're stupid ideas, okay, then not everyone's a brilliant idea, but then not only be able to coming up with your ideas, but also being able to test them and to follow them up. And to me, that was just really interesting.
Yeah. Oh, that's so yeah. Boy, we're very similar. I also in graduate school I haven't put it into those words, but I was also very interested in bargaining and coming up with these bargaining models, these Nash bargaining models in my IO class that were about all kinds of stuff. Or like I wrote in IO for our 2 IO classes, the economics of genre in movies. It was just
interesting.
Yeah, it was all this like monopolistic competition stuff that I didn't call it that, but I was it's weirdly, economics for a creative person seems like it's just so, it can be very creative.
It's very creative.
I don't think a lot of people think that.
My first advisor was Ariel Rubinstein. And who was a specialist on bargaining and his bargaining model. And my very first paper was an overlapping generations of bargaining. And it was just, where does this lead you? This is and it just got me excited, basically.
Yeah. Well, so you didn't stick with him though. So you sort of transitioned away from this. What's going on in your head at that time?
Well, I wanted to test out bargaining. Okay. And so that's why I originally went to the Fulton fish market. Okay. So I was interested not only in theory. Theory was very big back then, but I really wanted to test out something. So I went to there was
what year is this real quick, Katie? What year are we at?
1992, I think the spring of 1992. So I started in 89, did a couple years, first of courses, wrote my paper, and then my first first chapter, my thesis was this overlapping generations of bargaining. But by the time of spring of 92, I wanted to go out and see if I could do something empirically to test any of these bargaining models.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You're not just like, well, let me go download something from the PSID. You're going to get data.
Downloading was not what I wanted to do. Okay. Right. I mean, it was, back then it was very important, but that I kind of wanted to be out there. And that's always been, and I do not regret that in any sense of the word, going out and getting your own data.
What did you like about that? Why were you drawn? Because I bet that's a feature of your personality. What is it you liked about that?
I mean, isn't it much more fun going to the fish market, seeing fish and talking to people and seeing the prices happening than going to a computer and downloading something?
Oh goch, I bet you had so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, and I wrote in with the Princeton fishmonger, and we get there at 2 a.m, 2 days a week, or 3 a.m. on the other days of the week. And I learned a lot about fish, about cooking fish. Okay. And it was just very interesting. It was also interesting because Fulton was quite near Wall Street, and you could even imagine sort of some of the traders being Wall Street traders, but they're not. They're at the market.
Right. Right. You recognize that in them because of your own kind of prior.
Having traded. Yes. I was interested in
you could tell what they were.
The trading actually got me interested in bargaining too. So yes.
Okay. All right. So what is the Fulton Fish Project? Tell me for the sake of people listening.
Okay. So I originally went down there thinking that I could observe some bargaining. okay, because there are no posted prices at the Fulton fish market.
Mhm.
I met one of the seafood sellers and got some data. I think went down a couple times, got a little bit of data, and took it back to Princeton. And can't even remember who. Somebody said I should go talk to Orley Ashenfelter, that he would be interested. So I took my data to Orley Ashenfelter, and he said, "Oh no, that's great. Oh, I got some of their data from their inventory data. I got some sheets on prices." And Orley says, "This is all fine, but you got to go down there." He says, "Go down there for a month, okay? Spend every day and write down prices, okay? Collect your own data." So I said, "Well, okay." So I did. I spent a month down there, standing next to the whiting dealer. Timmy was his name, and basically wrote down, every price of per pound of whiting that was sold. They also sold other fish, but they would have boxes of whiting, so you could see how many boxes were out there. You could see the quality of the box. I'd ask him the quality. I couldn't, I got a pretty good judge, but I'd ask him, what quality of this. Somebody would come up and he would give them a price.
Yeah.
And, you can see how much they bought, when they bought. I also wrote down the ethnicity of the buyer, because
Are they negotiating the price? It's not like a market price is just emerging.
No. And they
negotiate
it. Yes. No, there are no market prices. And somebody had come up and say, Timmy would say, "Well, it's 90 cents a pound." And the guy would say, "Hey, your friend over there is offering 80 cents a pound." And, then they'd go off, and I couldn't actually observe the whole thing. Timmy put his arm around the guy and they'd go off and have this conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
And then they'd come up with the price, and then I'd find the final price and I'd write down the final price.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
do you think your bargaining model was useful?
No. And that's what it didn't have a lot to do at all. I mean, they would come up with a price. I didn't see a way to use this to test it. I mean, while bargaining was happening, certainly I couldn't observe it happening.
You think it's happening in ways that are not captured by your model?
Oh, not even my model, but I mean, I think that people, you bargain, that the price that you come up is the result of some sort of silent bargaining process between two people that you can't really even observe.
Right.
So I didn't really see a way of, at least at the time, of bringing bargaining to this situation.
Well, so are you changing your mind as you're collecting the data
on what I'm going to study? Yes. So I'm collecting the data, and I've got all this really cool data. Okay.
Yeah.
And
so how many days is it that you're there?
So I'm there for, I want to say either 24 days, maybe, something like that.
And what's the unit of observation? Is a fish?
Price.
One fish?
No. Price per box.
Price per box.
Yeah.
And how big does the data set get?
Not that big. Okay. So if they sold, how big? See, it's been a long time.
I totally get it. Yeah.
Okay. So originally, actually, when I originally started looking at it, I started looking at price discrimination per customer. So I had 4 weeks of data, individual transactions. But then I got more data from their inventory sheets, and I aggregated it to days. And when I aggregated it to days, I think I had 6 months of data daily. So not that much, probably about 100 data points of daily data on price and quantity sold. And that's what we ended up using for the causal inference part. That was the second part of my work.
So you're starting off with an idea. How would you articulate? How would the day one, like of like, this is what I'm going to be doing? Because it sounds like it might have changed at the end.
Mm-hmm.
What would you have articulated you were going to be studying originally? The bargaining?
Yeah, I think I would have said the price of fish, how price is determined at the Fulton fish market. Okay.
Got it. Okay.
So that's what I went off to study. And I thought that, it was kind of a competitive market. But then pretty soon I saw that different ethnicities of people were getting different prices. And that's what the first result was, is that Asians were actually paying less for fish than white buyers were. And, they you might say they had more outside opportunities. They were better at bargaining. They were willing to spend longer there. Whiting was really important to them, where it was usually an afterthought to the white buyers. There are all sorts of reasons why this was happening.
Wait, you don't think it's price discrimination or even racial
Well, it is.
bias
It's probably,
or something?
well, I mean, it's price discrimination based on elasticity. Their elasticity, they simply were more elastic buyers.
Yeah.
So it would be, it's really economics at work. Okay.
Right.
But then you have to explain how can they exploit that if it's really a perfectly competitive market. And at the end of the day, the market's not perfectly competitive.
Okay.
And that's how they could exploit it.
Yeah.
So I went thinking about bargaining. I ended up looking at price discrimination. I think that happens. So
yeah. If it's like, were you kind of going into it thinking, well, if there is a perfectly competitive market, it's got to be for fish because a fish is a fish and this is like a big market. Was that
like
kind of
Alfred Marshall in the 19th century used a fish market as the example of a perfectly competitive market.
Of a perfectly competitive market.
Yeah. So I've gone to, this is a traditional fish market. Is this fish market perfectly competitive?
And you go through it. What is the evidence that only kind of you could see that, like, you're going to have to educate people now, but what's the evidence that you come away with and you go, it actually is not perfectly competitive. And here's how I know.
Oh, because Asian buyers are paying less for the same box of fish than a white buyer. Okay.
Why is that evidence of imperfect competition?
Because all of a sudden the sellers are able to use the elasticity of the buyer and give that person a different price. If it were perfectly competitive, the white buyer would just go somewhere else and say, they would be competing to get down to the same price. I mean, it would be perfect competition. It's not perfect competition because there are two prices for different types of buyers. So once you have price discrimination, you can't have perfect competition.
I bet that was quite a discovery for you personally.
Well, it was fun. It was interesting.
Yeah.
And
well,
then
it's like, go ahead.
Yeah, forming it in ways. But yes, it was interesting to me when I saw that the Asian buyers were getting lower prices on average than the white buyers. It was interesting to me. I think the Asian buyers had no clue. I don't think the white buyers had any clue. Fish sellers knew, but that was very interesting.
Is that illegal?
No.
It wasn't illegal. It's not like there's nothing about that requires.
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, we tried to get it. I think this is where selling corn gluten mill, helped me. I would try to get the best price for the corn gluten mill that I possibly could.
Yeah.
And, if somebody needed it, worse than somebody else, you probably would try to give them a higher price. Now, you can only do that because there's some sort of market power.
Yeah.
With corn gluten mill, there were 3 producers of wet corn milling process, Cargill, A.E. Staley, and ADM. But with the fish, there actually ended up only being 6 sellers of whiting at the market. And they've been doing it forever, basically.
Well, then why is there so it seems like a natural reason to think that fish is a perfectly competitive market is both because to the non-discernible, economist who's never been in it, all fish looks the same, but it's not really clear there's barriers to entry. So there must be barriers to entry.
Well, at the time, the mafia was down at the market.
Oh my gosh, you have the best dissertation ever.
It was kind of, it was wild. I would pay to park, gladly pay to park, But it was actually also kind of safe. I'd go down there at, 3 a.m. in the morning. I would drive down myself every once in a while and, park and walk into the market. Yeah. So try that,
Yeah.
So if you were just a regular old fish seller, you might not want to just go down and set up your own shop. It might not behoove you to do that. So there were restrictions, barriers to entry.
Wow. Okay. So now moving to that is absolutely. I bet you. What was the response of your advisors and like people around you? I guess you're at Princeton. It's just like, like you said, everybody's super smart and everybody's doing cool stuff. But to me, this is like such a cool project. So the paper that ends up in the Review of Economic Studies is co-authored with Josh Angrist and Guido Imbens. And, now that they won the Nobel Prize, it's like you kind of also have a light cast on that dissertation, which is it was kind of part of also new realizations about instrumental variables. And I just kind of thought it might be neat to just talk for a second. First, how did you get involved with those two?
Yeah. So first of all, let me connect the price discrimination part to the estimation of demand. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So once we wanted an explanation. Why was there price discrimination? Okay. And my hypothesis was that it was based on elasticity.
Yeah.
Okay. So all of a sudden I needed to estimate elasticity. Yeah. So that's how I got to the demand estimation. Okay. And in the very first paper, I did it rather clumsily. I used wind speed and wave height, and I estimated different elasticities for Asian buyers and white buyers.
So this is like stormy weather instruments out at sea on the day that they got the fish.
Right, exactly.
Why is that an instrument?
Because it affects supply, but it shouldn't. You have to make the argument it doesn't affect demand, and so buyers wouldn't deter whether it's sea didn't have an effect on or had a marginal effect on the land, but that's the argument that you have to make.
Got it. Okay. Got it.
So I have now, I think about 100 data points. I want to say maybe 140. I don't know, days, and it's a pretty accessible data set, and it's also clean. So cleanish in the sense that it's not hard to explain my instrument. The fact that whether it's sea affects how much fish you catch, but it doesn't affect how much fish you buy, and that's what you need.
Clean. Okay? Can you just elaborate real quick on clean? Why are you using that word?
Probably not a technical word. Okay?
No, but I think it's helpful for.
Yeah, it's so the idea of the instrument. It's not. People aren't going to argue too much with you. Everybody will always argue with you.
Right.
That wind and wave height at sea is a good instrument for the amount of fish demanded on land. Okay, and I think that's what I mean. Is it's not a leap of faith that this is that wind and waves are exogenous. Okay, they come and they affect supply and probably don't affect demand. Okay?
Did people argue with you nevertheless though when you would give this talk on the was it the same kind of intense arguing about instruments at that time as I sort of think about now, or were they a lot more openly accepting it?
No. I mean, people would argue, and I think that we, ended up putting in, I forget some other controls in, just to make sure that these.
Yeah, you've got those day of week fixed effects.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, I mean, people always, but as far as it goes, it was a, easy to explain and kind of believable. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, I went to the UK. Okay, right after I did finished my thesis in 4 years, I went straight off to Oxford to do a junior research fellowship at Oxford. And Guido was in the UK at that time, and I think he'd heard about the fish data, and they liked the fact that it was easily explainable and easy to use. And so they asked, they said, they had this average treatment effect, and they wanted to apply average treatment effects to a demand function. And so this was a good data set on which to use it and explain it. So that's how I got involved with Guido and Josh.
But you were already sort of doing it, right? Because you were already using these supply instruments.
Oh, yeah. No, I already had my instruments, and they basically looked at binary instruments, and they had a different theoretical interpretation of it being just an average movement. So not so much the structural supply demand interpretation. And they wanted to apply this average treatment effect to a demand and supply situation.
Did that theoretical approach, did it seem all that novel to you, or were you already, what was the, you mentioned this structural average treatment effect. So I'm just curious, what was your
really non-structural average treatment effect versus a structural effect, basically.
Right.
I would say non-structural. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. They were both, Guido was just a fantastic econometrician, and Josh, had already been working in IV for many years. So frankly, I was flattered they wanted to work with me on this project.
Yeah.
So yes, I already had my instruments. It was actually, I want to give credit. It was Angus Deaton's idea to go out and get weather and wave height. Okay,
That's
so
great.
and he's another Nobel Prize winner who actually, so
he told you.
he said, yeah, he said, look, you can't just regress price and quantity on price. I'm a young graduate student. You got to go out and get an instrument. What about wind and waves?
Yeah.
Or I don't know if he said wind and waves, but what about weather? Can you use the weather? And that's when,
right. The classic instrumental variables. The very first, Philip Wright's first instrument was rainfall. When he was estimating elasticities of elasticities of I think it was like pork or something, or maybe it was like, he's doing all these like tariffs of, gosh, what is it? It's in my book. But he instruments with I believe I think actually the very first one was rainfall. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's right. Yeah, it's just very classic to use these weather instruments.
Yeah, because they're exogenous.
Well, so so you do that work, and then you kind of leave. You seem like you leave fish, and then you go into art and creativity. But I'm curious a little bit about what that transition is. Is that where how do you start? Because the bulk of all of your vita is tons of work on the economics of art and creativity.
Yeah, well, it started by price discrimination, and even I worked on the Angrist and Kruger. I got their fast food prices. The third paper of my thesis was getting their fast food prices and using the pricing data to test whether different areas based on the racial composition and wealth of an area paid different prices for fast food. And that was
Card Kruger.
Card and Kruger, yeah.
Card Kruger. You were collecting the data for Card and Kruger?
No, I didn't collect their data. Okay. Actually, I think I helped them sort out their data, clean their data a little bit. But they let me use they weren't using the pricing data in the first, or they were only using it marginally. But they let me use their pricing data to test whether different areas, to correlate prices of hamburgers with the race and income statistics of an area. And so I have a paper in the, anyway, I have a published paper on that.
Oh, so you were just, you just were, it's this line, the thread is this price discrimination.
Yeah, I was very interested in pricing and price discrimination. I'm still interested in pricing and price discrimination. It just, it's interesting. And so then when I went into art, it was really because I was interested in galleries. But the galleries wouldn't really talk to me, okay? Because, there are no posted prices. So what's the similarity? It's like fish. You'd go, there weren't posted prices at the time in many of the galleries, and they would, depending on who you were, you would get a different price. Mm-hmm. But the galleries wouldn't talk to me. So I'd gone into London, said, well, I'll just go over to Christie's and see what I can nose around and find. And that's when I went down to the basement and made friends with the librarian. And at that point in time, nobody had put together any art data. It was one of the very first art data sets to put. Now, of course, they're available everywhere.
Right.
And so I put together, again, looking at art. It was, it's pleasant looking at art catalogs. I put together a data set on contemporary art with prices and characteristics of the paintings.
From these archives?
From the archives, yeah.
And it was you said it's for Christie's?
Yeah, I went down to Christie's on King Street in London.
How far back did you go?
You mean in the archives?
Yeah. How many years back did you go?
Oh, I did 1982 to 92. It was contemporary art, so I didn't go. But I mean, you have to find the auction catalog. So you have to, at least at that point in time, you didn't just go online, okay, and download your art data. It wasn't available. Right. So you could go to a library. But the nice thing about going to Christie's is they had the pricing sheets. You could even see some of the reserves. So I got some of the reserve, the pricing, and I got some of the bid sheets too. And so so by going there, you could not only get the catalogs, but you could get the prices, whether it was sold or unsold. And that's I don't know. That's what I ended up doing. That was my. Wow.
Was it like an adrenaline rush a little bit, doing all that, kind of being in the archives and writing down all these old prices and feeling like a
Well, they weren't really old prices, but it was kind of fun when I saw the secret reserve price on one of the sheets that I don't think I was supposed to see. Okay, so but putting together, I mean, you're putting together something that nobody's done before. You all of a sudden have this data that you can work with, that you can play with. Okay, and nobody's ever asked any questions whatsoever on this data set. And that's what got me excited. Like when I first got the Fulton fish market data, the pricing data, I like couldn't, I was so excited to go and to start, playing with it, to graphing it, seeing what's in there. And it was just very exciting. And so when you've got a data set that nobody's ever worked on before, it's just kind of fun, basically.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. It can be intoxicating. You can be a little, you have to be really disciplined though to then figure out what the paper's going to be about.
Right. You've got to come up with a story and an idea, and then you need something to test. And absolutely. And you don't want to, you don't want to have the data lead you too much. But so yes, exactly.
Well, maybe that's where, your background with Rubenstein and just that starting out in so deep in theory was really helpful, because it seems like you just always had ideas and collecting data.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's an interesting. So yeah.
I was a literature major and I wrote poetry. I sort of specialized in creative writing. I wrote poetry in high school and college, and I think like as a kid, you especially when you move into college, like you sort of think of the artist as like either they're part of a school, like they're part of the abstract expressionist school or the beatnik writers, or you think of them as like driven by this like almost internal creative drive. But I'm imagining that it's more complex because you're studying art in markets. And I was just wondering, is there something that you've learned about art that, you think is the insights of economics that just is maybe demystifies or maybe adds to the mystery of art that a lot of people don't know?
Yes. Okay. I've got something I can explain easily. It's probably one of my favorite papers is, so people have always thought that artists needed to suffer to do good work. So there's this myth of the suffering of artists. So actually, you can kind of test that, okay, in some ways. So I looked at, and I'll ask you, what would you think? So the wife or the child or the spouse of an artist dies, okay?
Yeah.
What do you think happens to the price of that artist's work in the bereavement period? When he's sad or she's sad and they're bereaving these deaths relative to the prices of works produced at other times of their lives.
Okay, so the artist dies, and there was a period of time. So
no, not the artist, the spouse.
The family member dies.
The family member dies. You got the family member dies.
You're doing this is the suffering artist. His suffering has gone up, so his work is better. So the prices should be higher. And you're going to tell me it's not.
No.
It's not. Okay, so what's going on?
So prices are about 30% less during the first year to two, after the death of an artist. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And if you talk to a psychologist, they probably wouldn't buy into your theory on suffering artists. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
So there's
it's so incapacitating.
Yeah,
and so debilitating.
And so I use the theory I used to explain it is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi came up with flow theory. So it's the idea that if you're creative, you're in a flow. And, he even gives the example that a death in the family, interrupts your flow. You can't create, you have problems.
Yeah.
That's the idea. But so that's something that, so when you say, are they less creative? You have to be careful. Maybe the paintings they paint are darker and they're just, people don't like them as much. They might be every bit as creative. And I can't, though I look at our paintings painted in that period, less or more likely to be in museums, they're also less likely to be in museum collections versus other paintings. So, but that's the sort of thing. You've got this data. People aren't looking at it for these sorts of things. You've got prices and you can test out these ideas that nobody's,
But that's like such a clever that's like, when I think about the causal inference stuff that you're getting from your training, thinking about these natural experiments and things like that, that's such a clever way to disentangle causality from selection. Maybe the people who have been working on, like really great work, who were suffering, it just was selection. It was never the suffering. It was that's just who they were. And then when you look at this exogenous shock of suffering, you can find, in fact, it's the opposite.
Yeah, it's the opposite in the immediate years. Now, it's not to say that it doesn't, I don't know. I can't say what happens later on, really. I don't have the data, but yeah.
How'd you get that idea? That's not really a price. Is that a price discrimination? I mean,
well, it's pricing. It's not price discrimination at all. It's pricing at different times. I was at a conference and somebody was looking at sickness of composers. And I think they had 3 composers they were looking at. And I thought, I can do this with probably 12,000 paintings and 60 artists. So I spent some time working in the, collecting the data.
You collected 12,000 paintings from those artists?
Well, see, now all of a sudden, this was later. So you could start downloading stuff by this time. And you would buy the CDs. And so I could download the painting data, but I had to go to the library to read the biography data because you had to find the deaths. And so that was the harder part of this. So getting the painting, by that point, the painting data was readily available. Well, when I started, there were no data sets.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're such a
believe, but
you're like you're the picture of the scientific scholarly economist. I think that's such a great role model for people. I mean, that's just, what did people think? Did you get the sense, does your work get read, you think, by art historians that can say, oh, this is because it's really, you've written just a ton on pricing and you're touching on all of their folklore.
Well, I can give you 2 examples. Okay, one maybe not so favorable, and one maybe more favorable. Okay, one of our professors. By the way, I taught a course here called Economics of the Arts with an art historian, and I loved it. It was great. I did it for 10 years, and it was just so much fun. But there was another professor here. There's this art critic called Roger DePio, from the, I want to say, 18th century. Okay, and he would give artists. Like the great artists, Michelangelo, he'd give them grades based on how their color schemes, their creativity, their ability to draw. There were four areas. And so you have these numbers now that he would actually rank the artists. And so I took the rankings and I looked at whether or not the price increases and the prices at auctions for the higher ranking artists were higher, and whether or not they tended to increase more over time. And the art historians really can't stand Roger DePio. They say that for somebody to grade artists based on a grading scale is just antithetical to what you should be doing. Right. And I would say he was a good critic. He tried to rationalize the process. So in that sense, the work, I had some trouble getting, we didn't necessarily see eye to eye on that work.
Yeah.
Against that, I've worked a lot on artist resale rights, which artists are very interested in. Economists sometimes have different opinions on artist resale rights. I've done a lot of empirical work on that. And just most recently, I got asked, I wrote a joint paper on color and art with one of my colleagues in Amsterdam. And I think we're going to work again on that. So.
You love this research?
Yeah, and I'm slightly sad that I'm an administrator now and I don't get to do as much of it as I would like. But I like doing research. It's fun. Yeah.
Well, so what drew you into administration? You're the dean at Brandeis. What was that transition about?
I think it was coming here. I spent the first 15 years in the UK and came here as just a professor in the economics department, and loved it for the first couple of years because I didn't have to do any admin. So I was already starting to do admin at Oxford. But then, you're part of a department and somebody needs to be chair. So, it was kind of my turn. So I became chair. And I think did a decent job, but I was happy to give it up after 3 years because somebody else who was there was really good and wanted to be chair. And I mean, that's the way it works. Yeah. But then they needed a PhD director, and then the dean here left, and the founding dean came back and said he would be dean, but he asked me, would I please be senior associate dean? And Peter Petrie is his name. He's fantastic. He's a great mentor. And I said yes. And then you're senior associate dean, and then the deanship comes up, and I've been dean now for 4 years.
Been dean for 4?
I've been dean for 4 years now.
Yeah. That's a longer tenure though, usually dean. It seems like the deans we've had that are like, they kind of hang around for a while. Or it's like it seems like when you become chair, you come chair, you step down. But like when you become dean, you're like, I have a new career.
Yeah, that's a little bit like it. And in fact, when I stepped down from being chair, I went on sabbatical, and that's when I wrote the Death, Bereavement, and Creativity paper. I was bored. Okay, I think it's important to be bored. So, and that's when that paper the idea for that paper, and that paper got written.
Yeah.
But I've been now doing administration. I was senior associate doing pretty heavy administration for 6 years now.
Well, so what makes you? What makes you good at being a dean? When somebody's good at being, they say that person's a great dean. What is it that the attributes, and what is the outputs that are involved in that?
I think listening to people and bringing everybody along with you. Okay. So at least those are my strengths. Okay. Mm-hmm. So really listening and bringing everybody along with you. And I'm sure different great deans have different strengths, but, and I see us, I'm not going to, I see us as I like Brandeis. I've been here forever, and I like my colleagues very, very much. And so it's important that we're all headed in the same direction, and that we're all buying into everything that's going on here.
Yeah. Well, so imagine, if you could just talk to, like a high school student. I'll kind of conclude with this. Like, if you had the ability to go talk to like a group of high school students who have no clue what economics even is, and you just sort of had to kind of give the elevator pitch to them about, well, I have really loved it. What would you be trying to help them understand that makes economics really special?
So I don't know. I've always engaged with markets. I think markets are just very interesting, but that's me. I think different people have different interests. So if you have an interest in markets, and you have an interest in finding out things that nobody else knows, now you can do this in lots of different disciplines, but those are the kind of, for me, those were the, that's what drew me into economics.
Yeah. So, yeah. But it's like, it's the topic. But when I listen to you describe it, it's also like you just have all this, like what David Friedman said about Jon Snow, just all this shoe leather, just like getting out there, smelling up like a bunch of fish, digging through old records, and just like being. It seemed like a person hearing it's about markets, I don't think they would go, oh, and that's what it means. It seems like it's been, for you, it's been like whatever you want to study.
Yeah, no, it allows you, if you've got a good idea, and if you're an academic and you're in a university, you can pursue that idea. And yeah. I think so. This is a general sort of plug for research. I mean, yeah. It's for liking research. Now, economics in particular, as you say, I mean, different people have different strengths. I mean, my strength wasn't being a pure theoretician. Mm-hmm. Okay, my strength is some combination of being strong in math and statistics, but also being able to express myself, and actually, being honest, I like people. And I mean, you know, well, probably everybody likes people, but maybe my research has gone more the way it has because I have been more interested in getting out there. And maybe that's the same reason I'm a dean. I have not thought about this, but you brought it up. So it's,
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
That's neat. I think that you have done such cool work. It's I am really excited that you're on this. And I mentioned this off camera, but I'll just mention it again. Your Fulton fish is in my mixtape book, and in the mythology of causal inference and the way that I kind of think about it in my brain, it's like this history of IV is just such a central part of the story, and simultaneous equations and supply and demand is a central part of the story of both economics models and IV. And it's neat that your paper is so clean. It's such a neat, it's like, you know, we can go into our principles class and we can show, look, you can only get this elasticity if you move this curve or if you shift this curve. And it's one of these areas where econometrics and research and causality is right there day one in your principles class. When you think about it, all of your research, like perfect competition and demand elasticities and shifting, it's so neat the way it's like, it's just kind of like the full scope and story of economics in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the data is not hard to work with. It's not like, you know, you need, 300,000 data points to find this out.
Right.
And yeah, no, it was fun, and it was clearly fun. Okay. And it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, for letting me talk to you for this time. I really appreciate it. It's nice to meet.
Thank you, Scott. It's a real privilege to talk about the work, and it's fun. So thank you for listening to me.
Okay.